Hi, and welcome. This is a Digital Tabletop Fest 4 panel discussion where Auroch Digital, we're working on a game, Mars Horizon 2, The Search for Life, and we're really excited and happy to have Pantelis and Alexia here with us from ESA, and we're going to be having quite a exciting discussion about their work and how it relates to our game and the content in our game. So we'll start with some introductions. So as I said, but I'll say it again, I'm Tess Cartwright, and I am the producer of Mars Horizon 2, The Search for Life. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is John O'Donnell. Very happy to be here. I am the lead game designer on Mars Horizon 2, The Search for Life.
Hi everyone, I am Alexia Mallet. I'm a simulation and modeling engineer here at ESA Tech.
Hello everyone, my name is Pantelis Poulakis. I am a project manager of a mission, it's an ESA contribution to the Mars Sample Return campaign together with NASA, the Mars Sample Transfer Arm. Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's so great to have you both here. So we'll start with a few little questions for you both, if that's all right. Now, I'm sure there's people, watching this who are probably wondering, just like I am, how did you get into these roles? Like, how did you get to be working for the European Space Agency? If you could give us a little bit of background of how you got where you are.
Alexia, you want to start?
All right. Well, for me, the adventure started relatively recently. I joined ESA in November 2020, which was a very particular time to join any organization. But yeah, I was working in the Netherlands before, and I discovered that ESA was next door. And I thought it was a change for a career that I had in simulation and modeling. So I joined the European Space Agency almost 4 years ago.
I go a bit further back with ESA. Actually, my journey started when I was doing my master's here in the Netherlands in the University of Twente. I got to know about the ESA Technical Center ESTEC in the Netherlands, and I applied to do my master thesis here as an intern. And that's how I got into the space environment. I didn't have a space background. I'm a mechanical engineer with specialization in robotics, and I did my master thesis and I got into this wonderful world of space. And that led me to a job in Belgium in a space company. And then I came back 2.5 years later through the ESA Young Graduate Program, which the 4 years after your graduation, you can still apply for. And then I ended up in one of the technical groups in ESTEC. It's robotics and automation, because ESA has all the expertise is needed for space engineering, dedicated groups, and then you can enter, if you are in engineering, as a technical expert in one of those groups. And from that group, through my career, then I joined a project, the ExoMars project, the ExoMars mission, which is well advanced now, and we'll launch in 2028. And then from there, I remained on Mars as a domain, because ExoMars is an ESA mission for Mars. Then I transferred to the Mars Sample Return campaign. So that is kind of in a nutshell the journey.
Amazing. Wow, so cool. And I hope that people watching are also inspired if it's something that they thought that they could do as well. So as we said, Mars Horizon 2, The Search for Life. So there's an astrobiology focus here. And you mentioned a little bit about, I think just now, Pantelis, of the kind of what you're working on right now. And maybe you could both go into a little bit about what a sample return is, what that looks like as far as searching for life, and maybe what the odds are that maybe we'll find life.
So the search for life for Mars is really a topic that is extremely of high priority for the science community and the planetary science community, and because Mars also is the most likely candidate planet of our solar system to have developed life. Also with some moons of Jupiter as well. like Europa, where they have an underground ocean, but that's very, very far and away to explore. But Mars, being very similar to Earth, having started, is a very is a sister is a planet to Earth. It's a rocky planet, and it had early on developed water. We have discovered that it had like a lot of liquid water, oceans and rivers, and it was very, very similar to early Earth. It is very likely that life started on Mars as it started on Earth. So the question we want to answer here definitely is whether it did ever happen as we hypothesize, and if it ever started, is it still there? Do we have evidence? Could it be existing? The Mars sample return campaign doesn't necessarily only focus on finding life. It focuses on doing for the first time the round trip to Mars to go and overcome the challenge, what it means to develop all the means to arrive there and launch back to Earth. So it will be the first round trip mission we ever do from a planetary body. And we want to bring back to Earth the samples to be able to analyze them in all aspects, not only for life. Whatever, having a big lab on Earth that is very, very advanced is much more potent than having bringing the instruments as we do in most robotic missions in situ. And whether we will discover life on Mars is one of the questions we want to answer. But even more, what we want to have is have samples here on Earth for all the science that we cannot do now, but we will be able to do in the future. Because in 20, 30, 40 years from now, we may have instruments that can detect things that we are not even aware of right now, and will make us learn more about Mars, more about the life, more about anything else, as we still do for the samples we brought back from the moon in the 60s and the 70s. Now we have instruments and do science that we couldn't do back then. So we still do science 50 and 60 years later from the samples we had brought back then. So it is very important to do this mission. So for these two reasons, for the science that we will do now in the future, and to develop the engineering capabilities to do the round trip, of course, with looking ahead to send astronauts to Mars in a later time, which is a very, very challenging thing to do. The logistics and the technology needed is very advanced. And I would like to close with the fact that our other ESA mission, which is called ExoMars, is one that really focuses on exobiology and life, because ExoMars has a big drill. It will go 2 meters underground. It has very, very sensitive instruments to focus on detecting biosignatures. And the place where we will be collecting samples is below the thin surface of Mars that has been bombarded by cosmic radiation for billions of years. So that mission has a very strong focus on exobiology. Our sample return is an all-over science on samples mission, which, given that we get them from the surface of Mars, may have a little less opportunity of detecting life, but we do not know. We need to do this science.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to explain it really clearly and quite accessibly. I have a question about kind of maybe the biggest challenge in getting the sample back from the celestial body back to Earth. What are some of the biggest challenges that are faced in that kind of that transit?
The biggest challenges. So the biggest challenge is, it's a cumulative challenge to make all the elements that are needed, that are sequential and cascaded, to work to do this. But if I would say, to choose two biggest challenges, I would choose 3 top challenges. One is to be able to land the payload very precisely where we want to be, where we have collected the samples, because already the samples now have been collected by the Perseverance rover, which you may well aware that is now roving Mars and collecting samples and storing them in tubes. So first challenge to land really precisely on the nearby where the rover can come and deliver. The second big challenge is to launch these samples from the surface of Mars. It will be the first thing we do. We will land a small rocket that will receive these samples and then launch them back to Earth. And the third big challenge is then that we will deliver in Mars orbit an orbiting sample container, which is like, twice a basketball size. So we will have something like this in an orbit that we don't know exactly right now, and we'll have another spacecraft arriving to find it. So finding something like this is like beyond a needle in a haystack. It's a very, very difficult task, which now all the engineering teams are working what are the means to have this, and we have quite a few solutions, but still is a very, very challenging thing to do. And all of them for the first time.
It's wild, totally wild. I guess you've touched on it just a little bit, but I guess a question which would be really good for people to understand the kind of scale of what we're talking about. How many people are involved in getting this, sample back? If ballpark.
Is a difficult thing. I would say it's more than 10,000 people between the Europe and the US working on such an endeavor. Or if I would say, it would be in the order of 10,000 people if I would put an order of magnitude.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. So we're gonna just move a little bit in towards talking about the crossover between your work and our work, kind of linking the games and space exploration. So we wanted to speak a bit about kind of input versus output randomness, which happens in games, and maybe find a way that it crosses over with the modeling in real life. And input randomness is basically about like the proverbial cards you're dealt. So output randomness is choosing the action first and then finding out the effects if you were successful afterwards, kind of like in things like Dungeons and Dragons. So John, this question will start with you. If you can maybe give us a little bit more detail into kind of input and output randomness, and then we can relate it into the work of Alexia and Pantelis.
For sure, yeah. So this input and output randomness is probably like in the vocabulary of all the board gamers that would be watching this stream. It's I guess two very different kind of board games, which Tess was touching on. And we want to try and include both of those kind of effects in our game because they both model real life and probably model your work, which I'll invite you to come in on in a second. So yeah, the input randomness of being you get dealt a hand of cards. What's the best you can do with that? That's more like a puzzle. That's like, okay, as we even say, these are the cards you're dealt. You have to make the best with it when life gives you lemons and so on. And I suppose a lot of aspects of mission planning are maybe like that if the rover lands and it's not ideal, I'm sure ESA are not going to give up. They're going to try and solve that problem, and with all the different simulations and backup plans that they'd have. So that's like very exciting, and also maybe what tries to get captured in cinema. If we think of The Martian and stuff like that, okay, things have gone wrong, what am I going to do next? And then the output randomness, that's like in Dungeons and Dragons when you say, I want to bonk that dragon on the head with my sword, then you have to roll a dice to see how much damage you would do to that dragon. And I guess this also happens in space exploration. We'll prepare for the rocket launch, but then at the end of the day, we're all clenching our teeth, edge of our seat to see how this goes. So I would maybe invite Alexia to come in on that. Like, do either of those things, resonate with your work in modeling?
Thank you, John, for the question. Yeah, I think when you work for space, you need to be ready for absolutely anything. That can even be like event you could not see coming happening on the planet. Yeah, the great way to solve these uncertainties is to be able to run simulations. Now we like at ESA to separate simulation in the development phase and in the operation phase. We use simulation in these two contexts. I'm pretty familiar with how we use simulation in training and operations from also back in the day when I used to do simulations for pilot training. And then the object already exists. So you kind of already know what its behavior would be, and you can use this simulation a bit as a very high-end video games to positively train your pilots or your operators of spacecraft. That can also work with astronauts, by the way, but then it becomes like really more than bigger than nature kind of video game, probably. The way we use simulation in development is to accompany the design and the iteration of the technological choices of what we will mount on a spacecraft or a rover. Is extremely useful to narrow down what the uncertainties are with that choice of a technology or another. In that way, we don't really go full random at the input of our simulations, but most of the time what we can use to really narrow down some of the factors that we don't really know in what condition they would work is by using Monte Carlo simulations, where we're pretty certain that about certain parameter we want to keep on the spacecraft or the rover, and then we want to browse like an infinite amount of solutions, situations where the technology should sustain. So that's how we tend to solve these problems. We cannot really predict anything that can happen into space, especially in areas of the universe that we have not explored yet. But on the spaces that we have discovered how life works, how the universe is defined, then we can try to simulate all these different situations at random. So I would say in the life in a day of a spacecraft is more like output randomness. It's like, let me try to send you some telemetry. Oh, it failed. Okay, let's try this back. And when we design upstream the spacecraft, we go a bit more about this input randomness and try to really force feed the simulation to predict any possible terrible outcome that we could not foresee. But yeah, life has very, very mysterious ways to work. So we always end up being very creative in operations of the spacecraft.
Amazing. My question on that and hearing about all the variables and all the factors, are there a few factors that really stand out as being the biggest ones, that ones you just wouldn't ignore, some variables that you kind of hone in on that, not that you can control, but are a bit easier to predict maybe?
I think like your spacecraft exposure to a source of energy is absolutely vital to the mission. So you need to make sure that either your battery is charged or you have exposition to the sun to make sure that your system never turns off. I don't really know if all spacecraft have like a kind of like automated routine to automatically restart if you have like a power failure. Maybe in more automated systems in the future, the spacecraft will be able to do that. But it's really like the primary factor that you don't want to lose on board the space mission. And then I guess if you're flying through space, you definitely want to keep a bit of propulsion going on if you have a long journey, or if you have like some very difficult maneuver to land or orbit around a celestial body. There is a few factors we can define as like absolutely critical. My experience has like so far made this to like really like mandatory conditions for a mission to work out so far. And you need obviously a communication device to be able to send status on how the satellite is feeling at the moment, what is working and what is not working, and you need to be able to send it telecommands from Earth or another spacecraft actually. So I would say power power actuators like thrusters, and communication, be able to receive a signal and send one.
That's great. That's really good for us and the work we do. Yeah, sorry, Pantelis, go ahead.
I would add to this that every phase has its own criticalities of the mission that you need to really pay attention to. And one of the ways that these are designed is that whatever you design cannot be repaired anymore. So whatever it has to operate, and is not possible to intervene except just some software changes. So you have to make, it's also not only about the parameters you pay attention, but the philosophy of designing everything. So that's why you build in redundancy. Most of the systems the critical systems are double or triple, because if one fails, you revert to the other one. If you have one communication failure, you always have two transceivers on a spacecraft, or you double up. And the second thing, to avoid criticalities, you design a lot of margin inside. So you say, I need so much thrust. I design something that can deliver double the thrust, in order, if I need at some point more that I could not have accounted for, I have the availability. So redundancy and margin in whatever you design. And then, of course, the next phase, as Alexia said, has its own criticalities to focus, but the design philosophy has already been embedded to cover for this criticality, or help this criticality.
Can I just jump in on that point about like the redundancy and these payloads being able to look after themselves? I think you've both touched on. I mean, some people might think that the rover on Mars is like a remote control car that we can just tell it go left or go up or drill or pick up rock. But from my time working on the game, I understand that these things need to be super autonomous, and the round trip communications time does not allow for this kind of control. Can you talk to that at all?
Sure. They're not just remote control devices. They're also that. You need to have the capability in a system you build to remote control every last element of it, because you may need to interject. So that is already built in. But as you said, they're systems that are operating in a faraway world. You don't have the capability to have direct communication. That's very important to note, because every command, on Mars, we have maximum now the capability to talk to our hardware twice a day. So we have two communications windows. And when we do that, from the round trip command needs at least 8 minutes. So it needs 4 to 5 minutes to arrive to Earth, whatever you transmit. So you don't have the capability to remote control anyway. So for the basic functions, you just have an activity plan per day, and then that you upload, and then the system has to carry itself to go where it needs to go, to autonomously navigate, to plan its activities based on its onboard resources, and then safely execute. And if something goes wrong, to be able either to reconfigure to correct it, or if something has really gone wrong, in order not to put itself in jeopardy, to wait for the next communication to ask mission control. We can talk a lot about this. It's a very deep topic, and a lot.
Sure.
So and there's a lot of, now all these technologies are coming on board. Autonomous car navigation, like what we have on Earth, we use it there as well. Autonomous onboard planning. It's a very, very subject of research and development. Artificial intelligence is coming in slowly there as well, like the way that we're doing now vision detection and all the computer vision uses a lot of neural network training techniques. So there's a lot of science and engineering going into that.
For sure. I was just going to say, it sounds like a very stressful job that you'll send off these commands twice a day and then pray for the rest of the day.
I mean, yes, and I have to say the people who are doing the operations it's a different mentality than the people who are designing on engineering. They have to be very disciplined. It's very very structured, very careful. So very, as Alexia, you have really to test every command that you send. Every little thing has to be really, really thoroughly tested to make sure it's not wrong.
here as well, they use like Operation Simulator to really rehearse if the telecommand is gonna carry out what they were expecting. I was actually taking a training last year a bit about how spacecraft operations work, because when you design a spacecraft, you're like miles away from operating it. We're trying to blend the two competences at one, but we are both located in different areas. There's a lot of crossover, and it's very interesting to get a sneak peek into what's the life of like a spacecraft operator. And it's very funny, like it's very psychological. Like, you play against fate, and there is all this like confidence bias. There is like all this like kind of gaming theory like kicking in, and they have their own simulators for operations because they know they have to be absolutely certain about how their operations are gonna go, and they most of the time need to go and find us here on the design side to get this typical, maybe like we saw in the movies, like fit a triangle in the circle or in the square, and we're like, okay, let's try to work out what can we do. But you can't fix stuff in space. You can just try to maybe rearrange or reconfigure slightly. But it's very interesting how operation of spacecraft worked as well. It's a completely different world.
Yeah, amazing. Just one more little question kind of on this kind of topic of I guess it's bringing the risk and the communication together, really. So when you're trying to communicate risk, how is there a kind of an adaptation depending on who you're talking to, like based on whether you're talking to, say, the government, based on if you're talking to kind of the team. You said earlier there's 10,000 people possibly relating to this mission. So how do you kind of how do you communicate risk, and how does it change depending on who you're speaking to?
Oh, that is a very, very deep question. And risk is really a major parameter in our day-to-day life. Everything, at least on the project side, all the choices we do, and a lot of our mentality of designing things is risk posture based. So when you're doing a design choice to implement something, then it carries out a risk that this will not pan out the way you're going to do it, and then you have to have a mitigation and a backup plan. And that's why in a project management perspective, you have to always keep. We have a very formal risk process in place where we're keeping and tracking risk, communicating with the subcontractors, and try to keep an eye on the ball, or what we're doing, what's the risk element we're carrying. But when it comes to communicating, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, you have to keep a level of abstraction and try to know who you are addressing to communicate the risk at the same time, without hiding, but with carrying it forward. And usually you try to, in a project setting, communicate your top risks to your peers and to your stakeholders, and try to work through them. And then somehow these risks, and especially something like in the sample transfer campaign, which is a very complex endeavor with many parties, these risks have to kind of be a chain between the different parties, but also kind of being transparent. I don't know if it's asking your question. It's a very complex topic. We could talk for hours, but I hope it covered your.
I think we get the idea of how complex it is, and how careful you probably have to be depending on what risk it is and who you're communicating it to. So maybe that's for another time. Let's go to more depth. So we'll move on to kind of the, I guess, mission objectives, and so this is I'm finding this particular area interesting because I'm sure after everything you've said, you've built this mission, you've got your payload, you've sent it up, you got to land in the right place. But I guess, is there sometimes an opportunity or a necessity to change mission objectives once the mission has started? And has that happened, and does that happen?
your mission objectives, especially the primary ones, are really important to be maintained, and you would change them in case you are not able to fulfill some of them. What usually happens, though, is that missions that we design and that take place end up being successful, hopefully. And once they completed their primary objectives and you have a chance to extend life, then you are adding new objectives. I mean, take for as an example, if you follow the Mars developments on the JPL and NASA side, where they had the twin rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, which were designed to work for 90 days with a set of mission-based objectives, and they ended up being alive for thousands of days. So they end up, the mission objectives were extended enormously to keep exploring and exploring. And same with the Curiosity rover. And right now, it's very interesting that the Perseverance rover that is there initially had a mission objective to collect the samples and then leave them on the ground to be collected by a smaller rover that will come for the sample return. But now the mission has been reconfigured, and what we're planning to do is have the same rover bring them back next to the lander, which from its initial objectives to just collect and leave them on the ground, now its objectives have changed to be a vital element for the next step of the campaign. So they can change indeed, but reduced only if something goes wrong, but usually they're expanded if things go well. Do you have any other experience, Alexia, from mission objectives changing?
No, I would say that every spacecraft is really tailored to one particular objective.
Exactly.
If you're making a rover to go on Mars, you cannot put it on the moon and vice versa. But around this mission objective, which is most of the time really successful, then we realized that the mission could carry on for many more days and can capture more science, more measurements, and this is usually what we see that happens in space. We kept being mind blown about what happened on Mars and those rovers and this helicopter drone ingenuity.
That's
amazing.
another good example.
This is really good. Yeah, but you can't really repurpose a mission to do something too different. You're quite
it sounds like
with the original journey.
Yeah, you can be cautiously optimistic, and then that could move to really optimistic, and it can go beyond what you originally. I mean, that sounds like the dream. Sounds like what you want, and that you get more objectives. That sounds great. John, how does that, when you hear that, and far as your kind of game design brain and working on this game, how does that, I guess sometimes, we have these interviews and talks, and there can be a moment where you're like, ooh, okay, well, is that where we're headed in this game design? How are you feeling when you're hearing all this stuff in relation to Mars Horizon 2?
Yeah, it's super exciting. The way space exploration is set up is a little bit like a video game already, that you're doing these missions, and from what Alexia and Pantelis have been talking about, every mission is standing on the shoulders of the last mission that we've done. I'm sure, from the technology perspective for sure, but also where are we going to land next? We're preparing the samples for the next mission.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, that sort of story is very compelling, I think, for players. It makes it, very clear what the rover on the moon is doing, is helping us learn about how rovers work so that we can send rovers to other places, or sending, I know also a big part of ESA's objectives is sending humans to the moon to understand what it's like to put humans in space for extended periods of time. So that's just a very exciting narrative. I am compelled by the everything in space exploration is a first, it feels like. I mean, of course, we are building on the previous stuff, but I wonder what it'll be like when we get to Mars with the sample return missions, and we start to find other weird stuff that we weren't expecting before. Will the objectives change then? I'm sure they won't, because millions of euros go into this stuff. but that's just very exciting to me that it's like, in very alien environments, detecting signals that are also very alien. That again is just a very exciting narrative.
That like one answer actually leads to thousands more questions.
For sure.
Absolutely, yeah, that's how it goes.
So yeah, I guess I'm gonna bring it back to this kind of game crossover now. In when developing a game, and there's very clear sometimes objectives in a game, and there can be a very obvious kind of metric for failure and success. Now, I think what we're definitely trying to do and grasp in our work is the idea of failing upwards. So like you said, John, each mission kind of standing on the shoulders of another one, that there's always something to learn. And I wonder if you both could speak a bit to Alexia and Pantelis could speak a bit about kind of I feel really actually a bit uncomfortable saying the word failure, and I wonder like how that word sits with you at the European Space Agency, and how you all speak about that, and kind of building upon the missions, and some of that, if that makes sense.
It does.
That's the eggshell question.
Okay, I'll start a bit more positive. Failure is in a daily vocabulary because you want to analyze the systems that you develop for failure. So there is even a formal term in our standards of design, which is a failure mode analysis. So you have to design something that has this system, that have these components. You have to understand what are the interaction of these components that can bring a failure, under which conditions, and understand how the system behaves under failure. And of course, things that you develop can always fail, but you try to envelope your environmental condition and the task, and the failure modes do not interject. So that's what you're trying to do. So that is the approach you have on the design part of the failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I guess you are asking also what happens when the failure occurs, right?
Yes, not just occurs, but also maybe how it's talked about, and maybe the word failure isn't used. That's kind of my, a bit about that, like how it's, how you all kind of meet that, or what's the criteria for something being a failure. Obviously, something exploding on the landing pad, pretty obvious to everyone that wasn't meant to happen. But of course, there's many micro, successes, or failure is the only word I can think of as the opposite, but maybe there's a bit more you can dig into there.
I think we're still like a bit frozen with the approach to failure, as in a failure in a project or a failure in a choice or in a decision. It's still crystallized as something that sounds a bit bad, unfortunately. But that's also because this agency works with investment from governments in Europe, and they don't like being served failure for breakfast. So obviously you need to keep like this rate of success one after the other, and the deal and the challenge keep on becoming more and more difficult. So the chances that it's going to fail are obviously a bit bigger. I think we would all deserve to be a bit more relaxed about failure, because that's also in life theory in general how we learn the most. And I think a lot of us here at European Space Agency are extremely privileged and lucky to work here. But the fear of failure is still like a bit paralyzing, I guess. It's maybe how the organization is built up, and the fact that we don't really like wasting money. But I think we need to be a bit more relaxed with that, and we keep on learning. Like we keep on like absolutely being successful at challenges that are like completely unthinkable. And yes, we need a bit more confidence. And sometimes like a really big massive failure is an extremely good learning point to start from. So we haven't the same way as we haven't really gamified, I think, this organization. We have a lot to learn from that. We should not like really try to play the blame game when something bad happens. We're all involved in this, and we have all a responsibility. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe we were not mature enough. Maybe we weren't ready, and it's okay because we still learn a lot. But it's this kind of answers don't really politically serve you. So we try not to fail too much.
But actually, failure is something you need also to be prepared for, because the challenges are so big and the project lasts for a very long time. So it is, you have the chances, as Alexia, can be quite high, and have to live with it and embrace it and move on. Although I think that the success rate is quite high that we're having, and that is why missions take so much time to develop, and there's so much design redundancy and margin going into it just to be able to manage the failure aspect.
Sure. I suppose there's a perspective of the European Space Agency being this big multinational collaboration, and as well as being a long-lasting organization that will be around for a lot longer than all of us, that failure is really only a failure in the context of the mission, I suppose, and that everything that happens in this mission is really just for the bigger picture of the agency, that the people who will be working on the next mission in 50, 60 years time will have the learnings from everything that you've worked on. Yeah, and I think that's a perspective that we try to get across in the Mars Horizon games, that you're playing as a space agency, and so if a mission doesn't meet its objectives, then hopefully you can learn from that and build that into the next mission so that it has a better chance of achieving those objectives. But you're going to be doing so many missions over the course of this game, and looking at such an expansive history, that players will really get maybe a bigger picture of this failure. I did want to share one behind the scenes tidbit though about percentages in games. This is kind of a famous anecdote, but I won't say what game it's from. Is that when a unit would go into combat and had a 50% success rate, players would get really annoyed that their unit would lose half the time, and that people can't really process the 50%. Like winning 50% of the time doesn't feel as good as losing 50% of the time feels bad. So I think communicating risk is always a challenge for any game that says, oh, there's a chance of something happening.
Absolutely.
I wonder if there's so this question is just kind of come to me, and I'm really curious because this has been really interesting kind of topic here, and I wonder if either of you have a favorite mission or a mission that comes to mind where has kind of led the path to a lot of learning, and I don't want to use the word failure. I just more like maybe it was surprising, the outcome, and is there a mission that maybe you can think of that comes to mind in those in that way for yourself? It doesn't even have to be ESA.
Yes. I would put okay. I would put top three also missions for me. One has been the American, the twin rovers, the Mars exploration rover missions from the early 2000s, where they were, as I said, for 90 days and lasted for so much. I was also at the time when I was getting into the topic and followed them, all through this remotely through their lifetime like this. Second would be the ESA Rosetta mission, going to the comet for the first time. That was also following this from the inside. It was so exciting. Go to a brand new world and going forever from mankind, visiting a comet. And then the release of the little robot, imagine something orbiting a comet and then releasing Philae to land. Okay, Philae was not fully successful, but still it landed. And it was trying to put something like this on the surface of a comet from orbit was pretty exciting. And the other one, of course, is ExoMars, which I worked for many years, and it's deep in my heart, and which will drill on Mars when it arrives. And it's still my favorite mission that this really has a potential for a groundbreaking science to be done. So, sorry, you asked for one, I gave three, but I couldn't. I couldn't hold back.
We have so many great missions that are on the way who also helped us like pave the way to where we are at now. I think I don't know if I can recall from this training where the person was listing all these spacecraft that encountered like failure in operations. They're all like worldwide famous, and actually I've learned that spacecraft operator do prefer talking about operations failure than operation successes, because
it's more exciting
if you're operating correctly. It's a bit boring because nothing really happens and you just lay back and wait for maybe something to hopefully go wrong. But like when you have like these really hard cases when stuff goes bad, and they love talking about all their failures and mistakes, and I can't remember what spacecraft was it, but I can imagine it's quite common in the way that spacecraft need to deploy their arms to deploy their solar arrays, and they cannot fit all deployed in the rocket, so they fold like a little origamis, and then when they go to space and they're getting like switched on, they just start doing their little gymnastics and stretching out in the morning like this. And actually, depending on like the temperature conditions, the spacecraft will like breathe in and out, like the material will like dilate or like contract. And actually, one of these like solar array was stuck in position because either one of the latch didn't blew, or like these materials like would not like swiftly open anymore. And again, the operation team had like to crack their brain open to try to find a solution to deploy the solar array. And because in the meantime, like the spacecraft was losing power and the battery was depleting, and you needed to really find like a solution really quickly. So you look back at the plans and you really figure out like how you can solve this in the smallest amount of time.
And that's a very good example, going back to your question of failure. Failures cannot be either catastrophic or, because this was a failure that either you manage in time to recover or not. And this failure is something, it can happen, but then you turn it into a success if you manage to recover it. And this happen, very often in missions, that they're not going to the press because, okay, it's a failure that happened, but the technique, the engineering, the creativity behind to recover from such failure is remarkable.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the power of all these humans working together to problem solve in real time, and the kind of the bonding and the solidarity and the investment, and even watching you glow as you're talking about the ExoMars mission, Pantelis. It's really heartwarming. It's lovely.
No, I was just going to comment on our capability about having a collective intelligence to achieve for achievement is really remarkable in our species. And the next thing to conquer is use this collective intelligence for all the environmental crises that we're having, and to have really positive results there, because that's the most burning issue we're having now. But we have the capability to do it. That's the thing. It's really remarkable how this can work in so many domains, that we work collectively like that. So sorry, it was a bit of a tangent, but
no, it's a good tangent to have. I think it's really important, especially because as we're making this game and we're talking about the space industry and we're doing all this research, and there is a lot of kind of there is definitely a huge part of the population that feel like it's money being spent off the planet rather than on the planet. And I think that when you talk about it, and the more that we do our research and learn that actually it's very related, and a lot of the work that you are doing is feeding into these environmental problems. And so there is kind of a call and response there that I think sometimes gets missed. So I really appreciate you bringing that in. So, well, now it's a pop culture question, basically, and it's a question about, is there a film that you feel does science, whether it's, I mean, we are talking about space science, but in general, like that does science really well, like gets it really accurate, and doesn't take too many liberties, as it were.
A movie or a game, you said?
Movie or game. Let's say either.
I love space movies, and it's been absolutely terrible to start working here, because then you realize the amount of fantasies the directors have taken, and you're like, well, thank you, C-3PO, but it's not gonna work out this way. Okay. But
no, but I have to say, I think the Martian. Okay, you could not say that it was how exactly things work scientifically fully accurate, but it was a very good effort. And I think the same, like you could say also Interstellar had quite some a good science backing up. And when also it was developed, there was the science advisor, there were very renowned scientists that really had very good input. So I would say these two films, they were very good attempts. And you need the creative freedom, of course, not to respect everything that exactly that it works with physics, because maybe it wouldn't make as an exciting film.
Yeah, I think there was a part in Interstellar, for instance, that had to be up to theory and theorize like what would happen with this Tesseract and this black hole time travel thing and wormhole. And I mean, it's not because you work at the European Space Agency that all these movies become, like jokes or funny things. I'm not like a black hole expert, so I watched this movie and I'm like, this is fantastic. And the music is great and the actors are like, super epic. There is a TV show as well, The Expanse, that was also rendering pretty nicely, like orbital dynamics and like space environment in general, civilization moving out of baby Earth. But
Great. I just wanted to ask you, John, as well, just about that kind of idea of taking liberties and how you are finding having that balance within kind of designing a game and being authentic.
Yeah, I think these people from the European Space Agency need to give us all a break, need to give the creatives a chance. I agree. Like through working on the project, we've definitely learned about like the liberties that a lot of media have taken. But at the end of the day, they're trying to create drama and they're trying to like get the player involved or immersed in this world. I think one of the challenges of space exploration is that things are really slow, and I don't mean that as a criticism. Things take very long amounts of time. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because of all the testing and the money and even the orbital mechanics. We can't go to Mars every day, so all of these things are challenges that are. It's good for these for media to like give a nod to, so the player can be like, why did they do that? Oh, they did that because it's referencing this law of physics or this project or this challenge, without forcing the player to, wait 4 years for another chance to go to a certain destination. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexia and Pantelis. Thank you, John. Really appreciate this conversation. It's been like really enlightening, really fun and quite funny as well. So thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. For people watching, there's some links to follow if you want to find out more about all of this. And best of luck on the ExoMars mission. Really grateful. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun for us as well. And it was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It was a great time.